Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to CLS Social Studies. Today we're going to be talking about problems of the Gilded Age and then going into the progressive movement. However, we have to kind of rewind a little bit because we have to start really kind of at the end of the Reconstruction period and then how the Gilded Age really comes into fruition. So, as the majority of Reconstruction took place, it took place during the Grant administration. Ulysses S. Grant was a hero of the Civil War, and he was elected to the presidency in 1868 and reelected for a second term in 1872. When he was commanding the U.S. forces during the Civil War, it was well known that Grant struggled with alcoholism, and that had affected his command on different occasions, and actually this would continue into his term as commander-in-chief. There were a list of admirable accomplishments that Ulysses Grant was able to accomplish during his tenure. As a commanding officer for the Union Army, he was victorious over the Confederacy. As the 18th President, Grant fought for civil rights. He passed 2 civil rights acts, and he cracked down on the Ku Klux Klan when he arrested large numbers of them, and he attempted to banish the white supremacist group as a whole. He was also responsible for passing the 15th Amendment, which allowed voting rights to all men, regardless of race. Unfortunately, even with all the good things Grant did as a president, his administration was known for corruption. Overall, there were 8 scandals during Grant's presidency, and as a result, many Americans began to question the honesty of their political leaders. In Grant's second term, there were 2 corrupt scandals that truly hurt Grant and his administration. In 1875, Grant's head of the Department of Justice was caught taking bribes to not prosecute certain cases, and in the same year, the whiskey ring scandal struck headlines. Many federal officials, including the private secretary of President Grant, were indicted for taking bribes and evading taxes, leading to millions of illegal funds. Grant originally ordered an investigation and almost immediately rescinded it, leading to Grant being accused of covering up the investigation to protect his friends. This would hurt Grant in the future as he were to die nearly penniless writing his memoirs. So how do we go about to attempt and fix this wrong? Or these wrongs? Well, politicians knew that action was needed to undo many of Grant's fallacies. First, in 1877, Rutherford B Hayes was elected during another questionable election known as the Great Betrayal. However, he promised radical changes and reform in the government. Only serving 1 term, Hayes was not able to set forth his goals. In 1881, James A. Garfield was elected, promising reforms and change. However, 6 months into his term as president, Garfield was assassinated while at a train station in Washington, D.C. When Garfield was killed, his vice president, Chester A. Arthur, was sworn in. In 1883, Arthur supported the Civil Service Act, which aided federal employees. After 3 failed presidential terms, Democrat Grover Cleveland was elected into office. Cleveland was the only president in history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, serving from 1885 to 1889 and again in 1893 to 1897. Cleveland worked diligently to hire and terminate employees based on merit and experience and not party loyalty. Americans were not satisfied with Cleveland's first term and elected Benjamin Harrison, whose legacy was cemented with the passing of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which fought against the monopolies and trusts of the Gilded Age. Finally, the last president to help win back the trust of Americans was Republican William McKinley. Now, McKinley was president during the Spanish-American War and avoided any major scandals. While he earned back the trust of many Americans, he was assassinated in 1901, leading to the most progressive era in American history. Now we are going to start the progressive era. So the United States had had many periods in history called eras and ages. During the Industrial Revolution, known as the Gilded Age, America was fraught with industrialization and urbanization, which brought poverty, disease, and crime to cities across America. The Progressive Era between the 1880s and 1920s followed the Gilded Age and was a time where people in the nation, specifically reformers, fought through many avenues to make things better. Many progressive reformers attempted to make right the wrongs of the past. Remember when we covered the corrupt political machine Tammany Hall, which was led by political boss William Marcy Boss Tweed? He used bribery and threats to stuff the ballot boxes in order to control the vote and keep his favored elected official in office. In New York, the mayor would look the other way while Tweed stole millions from immigrants and controlled municipal affairs. Reformers of the Progressive Era aimed to fix political fraud and rid the government of such extremists. So who would step up to do some of this stuff? We have to call these guys heroes, reform heroes. So in order for reform to happen during the Progressive Era, someone needed to step up to lead the charge against corruption and industrialization without fear of major retribution. These brave Americans were called muckrakers. Muckrakers were journalists who wrote about the evils of industrialization and urbanization in newspapers and magazines to show American citizens the atrocities of racial discrimination, tenement housing, child labor, and yes, even corruption in business and politics. Enter one Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast was a German-born American cartoonist who drew cartoons about the ills of urbanization and was responsible for influencing Americans to pressure government officials for change. One of Nast's favorite targets was none other than Boss William Tweed. Nast's cartoons would expose Tweed's corruption by putting Tweed in positions of wealth and power, like drawing Tweed with a bag of money as a head. Tweed was furious about Nast's cartoons. Tweed understood that a large portion of American immigrants could not read very well, but they sure could understand cartoons about Tweed and his wrongdoings. These famous cartoons helped lead to the downfall of corrupt people like Tweed, even leading to their demise. Tweed had escaped to Europe and tried to escape penalty of the law when, because of Nast's cartoons, Tweed was recognized, arrested, and eventually died in jail. So who were progressives? Progressives were reformers who worked tirelessly to solve the problems caused by the rapid industrial and urban growth caused by the mass immigration to the United States in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. Some of their main goals were to eliminate the causes of crime, disease, and poverty while trying to ease the overcrowding in tenement buildings in the city. Progressives would carry the torch from previous reformers like Horace Mann and advocate for better education in the public school system and included the enactment of school attendance laws. Reformers like Susan Blow opened the first public kindergarten, and philosopher John Dewey helped children how to problem solve and not just memorize information. Some progressives and labor unions would argue to abolish child labor and promote better working conditions, while others would fight corruption in business and dishonest policies or dishonest politicians. Other progressive reformers attacked the ills of urban life. After progressive exposed the dangers of high-rise buildings, city planners began to design safer building codes. Others would follow in the footsteps of Frederick Law Olmsted and build public parks to escape the concrete jungle. Like Olmsted Central Park in New York City, sanitation engineers addressed the pollution and sanitation issues and worked on cleaning up the streets of all filth and excrement that built up on a daily basis and projects that would help clean the water system. Civil engineers would attempt to improve the urban transportation network by cleaning the streets and making it safer to travel. Progressives were seeing successes rise in their fight when death rates began to decrease in areas where the city planners, sanitation, and civil engineers addressed urban troubles. The Progressive Era also saw Americans trying to persuade the government to be more responsive to Americans and their needs. In order for this to happen, in 1913, Congress passed both the 16th and 17th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. The 16th Amendment put forth the idea of a gradual income tax. This amendment allowed Congress the power to levy and collect taxes on income based upon the amount, basically saying that the more money you earn, the more you'll be taxed. The 16th Amendment made it possible for the government to retrieve funds for infrastructure like building roads and enforcing the laws. The 17th Amendment did not relate to Americans' money and how it improved the nation. Rather, it gave Americans more power in selecting its leaders. Prior to 1913, state senators were selected by state legislatures and not by the people. The 17th Amendment allowed Americans to vote directly for their state senators, allowing the popular vote to decide. It is here where progressives work tirelessly to reduce the power of corrupt political machines by doing things such as ending corrupt ballot practices and adopting the secret ballots. Some government officials turn progressives to aid in change. Robert M Laflette was a Republican governor from Wisconsin who aligned himself with the Progressive Party. He challenged the power of the political bosses and spearheaded voting reforms called the Wisconsin Idea, which severely limited the power of political bosses and was successful enough to spread to other states. There were 4 political reforms that were influenced by progressive. One of Lafayette's top priorities was the implementation of primary elections. Primary elections allowed voters to choose their party candidates rather than having it done by political bosses. Another voting reform was recall. Recall was adopted by several cities and states and was a special vote that gave citizens the right to remove an elected official through direct vote from office before their term has ended. A third reform is initiative. This allowed a certain amount of registered voters the right to propose a new law and force the government to allow them to vote for it. And the last voting reform was referendum, which allowed voters to directly approve or reject proposed or enacted laws. Not every city or state incorporated these voting reforms, but many of them did. Some urban areas themselves were jumping aboard the progressive reform train. As urbanization turned cities into disease-infested cesspools, city leaders began to take responsibility and attempted to clean them up. Some cities adopted a form of government in which a professional manager ran the city, while others chose a group of elected officials to lead the effort. Labor unions fought for the abolition of child labor. Photographs of children as young as 8 years old were popping up from the Muckrakers, showing Americans the dangerous positions children were being put into on a daily basis. Pictures of children near molten glass, dangerous machines, sharp oyster beds, and residual effects of the coal mines showed up in newspapers across the nation. Many states enacted a minimum legal working age and a maximum number of hours per hours of work per week. Progressive also fought for the rights for women. Women would work from sun up to past sundown in the textile and garment industry, most times because they did not get paid until the work was complete. In 1908, the case of Muller versus Oregon upheld a state law in which women could work no more than 10 hours a day. Sometimes, however, reform only came after tragedy struck. Remember when we discussed the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory? In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was located on the top floors of a New York City high-rise building. Fabric was piled high in the sweatshop, and garment scraps were piled in trash cans. Some believe that a lit cigarette was thrown in the scrap can, igniting the fabric. The lone fire escape collapsed. Only one of 4 elevators worked, and because management didn't trust the women, they locked them inside the factory. There was no way to escape. Over 140 women died in the fire for many different reasons, and it was the deadliest factory disaster in New York City until September 11th. In response to this, the New York State Legislature established a 54-hour work week for women and imposed new building regulations and factory safety rules. All right, we're going to continue with this progressive train next time. I'll see you next time.